What's up and welcome back to Gameball. This is your host, Matson Montilla. And as mentioned, we have Tennessee beat writer from Rocky Top Insider, Ryan Schumpert, joining the show. Ryan, thank you for joining us. How are you?
I'm doing well. Appreciate you having me on this morning.
Definitely. And as I was telling everybody, this Tennessee-Alabama game kicks off 3:30 Saturday. Both teams kind of limping into it, but they're both one-loss teams. So this game has a lot of meaning to their season and the playoffs. So what do you expect from this Tennessee-Alabama matchup just right off the top of it?
It's a really interesting one, and I think it'll be competitive, but it's very interesting in the sense that it's really strength on strength in Alabama's offense versus Tennessee's defense, and weakness versus weakness with Tennessee's offense versus Alabama's defense. I mean, a bunch of question marks on both those sides. I mean, Tennessee, Josh Heupel's first, I think it was 43 games as a head coach, had scored in the first half. Largely had been one of the best first quarter offenses in the country for at least the first 2 years of that. And then the last 2 weeks, they haven't scored in the first half, and a loss at Arkansas and a win last week in overtime against Florida. So a lot of uncertainty for Tennessee's offense right now, and Alabama's defense obviously got really, you go back 10 quarters, they played great in the first half against Georgia and got torched in the second half of that game as Georgia almost pulled off the comeback, and then they give up whatever it was, 42 or something to Vanderbilt the next week, and even South Carolina, the numbers weren't quite as bad, but not a really dangerous or highly touted South Carolina offense. Gave them a lot of issues last week, so I think it's really interesting in that two teams that are struggling, their units that are struggling will match up against each other. And then Alabama's offense, which has probably been one of the best two or three in the SEC, and Tennessee's defense, which has probably been one of the best two or three in the SEC.
Definitely.
We'll also be going at it.
Yeah, no, 100%. And something you mentioned early on was Tennessee's offense against Florida and against Arkansas was pretty much non-existent in that first half for both games. And I want to talk about Nico, right? This star-studded quarterback, he's awesome. Like, I'm not trying to discredit him. But one thing I saw that he had issues with, especially in the Florida game, was he kept staring down his receivers, and it ultimately led to one of his interceptions and then a couple of hard hits by his wide receivers. They held onto the ball, but still, he was kind of staring down the receivers. So how do you think Coach Heupel is going to try and ease him into this matchup where he can maybe get some more confidence and play in more of a groove?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's get some quick hitters, and they've tried to do some of that. And I think the big dilemma with Tennessee's offense right now is you want to do a lot of that. You want to do a lot of the quick stuff, simple stuff that makes Nico's life easier. But at the same time, Tennessee's offensive line's been so bad, it's just been a real challenge for them to be able to sustain 8-10 touchdown drives. So I think and teams are rolling people into the box because of the offensive line struggles, and trying to make Tennessee hit some passes over the top. So it's a kind of an interesting spot of Tennessee needing to hit some big plays to not have to sustain long drives, because it's just a challenge right now with their offensive line, while also not wanting to try to make things as easy as possible for Nico. One thing they've done some early in the season, and they did it fun last week, especially in the second half, was just rolling him out. Right now, he seems uncomfortable in the pocket, and some of that you can't blame him. Young quarterback, the offensive line's been bad. The pocket's been breaking down a lot, but even when the pocket is clean, it does feel like he's a little bit in his head. But that's, even when he played last year, he was really good off script, really good making throws on the run. So they've been trying to move the pocket, get him out on the run, where maybe you simplify one or two reads and then you take off running or throw the ball out of bounds, and maybe just try to mitigate some of the offensive line concerns.
Yeah, and going off of that, do you think that they're going to continue to rely heavily on Dylan Sampson? I mean, in every game this year, he's ran for over 90 yards rushing. So do you think they're going to try and maybe keep it more balanced by using Sampson? I mean, it worked well for teams like South Carolina when they played against Bama. They ran the ball well with Rocket Sanders. So do you think they'll rely on the run?
Definitely. I mean, that's really always been the overlooked part of Josh Heupel's offense. Every year he's been at Tennessee, the Vols have had a good rushing attack, but Dylan Sampson's by far Tennessee's best offensive player, and they're gonna continue to lean on him. And he's really Heupel's first 3 years. It's been a lot of running back by committee. That really hasn't been the case this year. I think he's at might be like 110 carries already through 6 games. Last year, Jalen Wright was Tennessee's leading rusher, ran for 1,000 yards, had a great season. He only had 137 carries. So there's a very real chance that in the next probably 2 games, 8 games into the season, Dylan Sampson's going to eclipse what a 1,000-yard rusher had in carries all of last season. So he's going to get the ball a ton. They've tried to get him the ball some in the pass game just because he's so dynamic out in space. But he's the go-to guy on this Tennessee offense. And the Summit offensive line struggles have continued in the run game, but he's still finding a way to consistently create a bunch of yards and some chunk plays, and that's been a little bit of the saving grace for a Tennessee offense that's really struggled.
Yeah, even when the defenses know it's coming, he still finds a way. Switching to the other side of the ball, though, you mentioned it. Tennessee has one of the best defenses in the country, right? They're second in yards allowed per game, so they're playing really well there. They rank top 10 in fewest points allowed per game. But entering this matchup, they're going to be without their leader, their linebacker, Kennan Pili, the guy who wears the mic, has a green dot on his helmet. So without him there, what absence do you think he creates as a leadership player, but also being this phenomenal linebacker? And how do you think Tennessee's going to respond to that?
It's a good question, and one that'll certainly be interesting to track. And from the leadership standpoint, it's hard to quantify that, but he is the leader on Tennessee's defense, and a guy that's just very, very respected in that room. Really stout against the run. He's been absolutely fantastic against the run. Tennessee's run defense has been really good all season. So it's a big loss there. Now, what I will say is he got hurt on the 3rd play of the game against Florida last week. So Tennessee does largely already have a week under their belt playing without him. And I think Jeremiah Thielander, who's his backup, I feel pretty good about him for Tennessee's sake. He's played a lot of football this year as a backup, and he's been effective. Now, when you get past Thielander and Arian Carter, who's the starter beside Pili, that's when things get a little bit more dicey. You have a guy like Caleb Perry, a guy like Jalen Smith, that all of a sudden they go from playing 15 to 20 snaps a game when they're in a specific packages or specific roles to all of a sudden needing to play maybe 25, 30 snaps a game, and you're out there for full drives at a time. I think that's where it gets a little bit more dicey. So it's certainly one that's going to be interesting to watch. It's undoubtedly a loss for Tennessee, but if they can stay healthy the rest of the season, I don't think it'll necessarily be a debilitating one for them either.
Yeah, so you might have mentioned it, but who do you expect to be the one that wears a green dot on the helmet for the defense?
Yeah, Tennessee's coaches, when they've met with the media this week, have not given that away. They say they're going to rotate it. I think was what defense coordinator Tim Banks said when he met with the media on Tuesday. They'll have different guys wear it, whether that be Thielander or Carter. Maybe it ends up being Jalen Smith and some opportunities too. But for the most part, I think it'll either be Carter or Thielander. And he kind of downplayed it, which maybe is just a coach thing to do. But talked about how the way that Pili is not like he's played every single snap in all these games this season either. So they talked about how other guys have already had to be wearing it some when he's not out there. But certainly that role for those guys will increase on Saturday.
Yeah, well, no coach likes to tip their hand. And again, this is beat writer for Tennessee Athletics, Ryan Schumpert for Rocky Top Insider. Ryan, I have a couple more questions before we wrap it up here. But something that Josh Heupel really spoke on in the teleconference was he really wants to contain Jalen Milroe. And we saw the Florida game, although they weren't these uber athletic guys, but Graham Mertz and DJ Lagway were able to elude some of the pressure and either design runs or scrambles, pick up some first downs. Jalen Milroe, obviously way different, right? He's ran for over 300 yards this season, 11 touchdowns. This defense is great, but Milroe's special. So do you anticipate them, how do you anticipate them trying to contain this uber athletic guy, Milroe?
It's the big question, and I'd probably be making a lot more money if I had a good answer to it. But I think that's the number one thing you have to look out for Tennessee in this game, or Tennessee's defense. To me, it's the number one key. Milroe is just so dynamic with his legs. I continue to think they'll probably blitz a lot. That at least on third down situations, blitzes with a spy. They did that a lot last year. Now, last year's game, it was kind of around that time in the season when Alabama started to run Milroe a lot more, so maybe it wasn't quite the same Milroe rushing attack that we're seeing now, but Tennessee did a pretty good job in that game of containing Milroe's legs. But that will be the big question and a big challenge. And I think it'll be key to see if Tennessee can hit him some early in this game and Tennessee's pass rush can get to him, because I think we've seen Milroe, for as good as a player as he is, I think we saw last week in South Carolina, when he faces pressure and he gets hit a little bit early in the game, it feels like like most quarterbacks, kind of the stuff I talked about with Nico, he starts to feel that pressure a little bit more and maybe not keep his eyes down the field as much, which Tennessee's secondary has been good this season, really hasn't been tested a ton, hasn't faced a bunch of good passing attacks. This passing attack and certainly the big play capability of Ryan Williams will be by far the best Tennessee's seen to date.
Yeah, that's a good question. Ryan Williams, phenomenal wide receiver, only 17 years old. I mean, he makes me feel old somehow. He's incredible to watch. So you think he's going to be one of the tougher players Tennessee has faced all year?
Definitely. I think just giving it a quick scan over Tennessee's schedule, I think him and Milroe are the two best offensive players Tennessee's faced at this point in the season. So it'll be a challenge. I'm interested to see. Tennessee's this year done a lot of blending of zone coverages and man coverages, so I'll be curious to see what that looks like. But Jerron McCoy, who's a sophomore corner transferred in from Oregon State, has been just really, really good, kind of a revelation for Tennessee in the back end of this season. I'm sure he will get some man-on-man assignments against Ryan Williams, and that's a matchup I'll be really intrigued to watch because, again, to this point in the season, McCoy's been great, but obviously I haven't seen a guy like Ryan Williams yet.
Yeah, well, I'm excited too because man on man against a guy like Ryan Williams, that's going to be cinematic right there. That's going to be a movie. So two more questions before we wrap it up here. Like I said though, Tennessee, Bama, both one-loss teams. This game could really decide playoff fates, right? Like if you have two losses, I was looking at it earlier, the chances of you getting into the playoffs are very, very slim. So do you think Tennessee understands that? And if they were to drop this game, do you even see a path to them making the playoffs with two losses?
Yeah, I think they understand it, certainly. And, yeah, I mean, there's a path. I think if they win out, I think 10-2 will probably be good enough to get them in. But there's a game in Georgia in mid-November, and especially if Georgia loses this weekend and they have two losses, it's hard to like Tennessee's chances in that game. So I do not feel very confident Tennessee is going to run the table after this game, win or lose. So from that aspect, to me, it does feel like a must-win game for their playoff hopes. And it's in a lot of ways the same ways for Alabama. They probably have a little bit more manageable schedule than Tennessee does the rest of the way, but still a home game against Missouri and a road trip to LSU, really, I think, right after the bye following the Tennessee game. So in a lot of ways, while there are paths for both these teams to make the playoffs, even with the loss, those paths are pretty narrow. Both teams need to win on Saturday if they're going to make the playoffs. 100%.
And again, this is Ryan Schumpert from Rocky Top Insider. I'm going to ask you about score prediction in a second. Before we do that, just one more, real question. Tennessee, the one thing that pops out to me is how tall their receiving core is. They have unlimited height. They have, I believe, 3 players over 6'3". Do you think they're going to try and use that to their advantage, especially with Alabama having this shaky secondary that we've seen be exposed against Vanderbilt and against South Carolina?
We really haven't seen it a ton this season, and that's something that, an area that I would be or have been a little bit critical of Nico in. That, Tennessee, one of those guys, Dante Thornton, has a lot of speed, but Brazell and Brew McCoy are not the fastest guys. And, I think there's an element of he just needs to let it rip into some one-on-one coverage a little more. And there's not been a ton of separation, but I don't think there's going to be a ton of separation with those guys. And trust those guys' physicality to go make some contested catches. I do wonder, Chris Brazell, he's a Tulane transfer. That was the big talking point about him, or for strength for him in the preseason, is how good he is in jump ball situations.
Yeah.
Last week was really the first time we'd ever seen him do it. They did it on a 3rd and 10 late in the game. They just threw in deep. They were kind of backed up in their own end zone, and he made a great leaping catch. Now he got pushed out of bounds, so didn't get the feet in. But that was like almost a click of, this is something we heard about a lot this preseason. Tennessee's offense is struggling. We haven't seen them try that much. So I'm curious if we maybe see them take some more one-on-one contested shots to him because whether that was in spring practice or fall practice, he did show the capability of doing that. And, the play you mentioned earlier of Nico kind of throwing a hospital ball over the middle and the receiver getting rocked and making the catch was Brazil, too. So he made some plays last week. It was the best game he's played this season. I'm curious if they give him a couple more of those opportunities.
Yeah, 100%. And so the last time Bama played at Tennessee was 2 years ago, and we saw the Jalen Hyatt legacy game, that phenomenal shootout, goalpost ended up in the water. Do you think we see something similar, and more so along the lines of a victory for Tennessee? And if so, why?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's an interesting one. I've gone back and forth on it a little bit. Right now, I'm leaning Alabama.
Okay.
And we'll have our official predictions on the site tomorrow if anybody's interested and wants to check it out. But I'm leaning like 31-24 Alabama. I think my big thing is that I trust Alabama's weakness, their defense, more than I trust Tennessee's weakness in its offense in this game. And the way both teams have kind of struggled to sustain drives, it feels to me like this is going to be a game that comes down to chunk plays. And Jalen Milroe and Ryan Williams, I just trust their ability there to do a little bit more. Now, maybe the home field advantage, it evens that out.
Yeah.
I certainly wouldn't be shocked if Tennessee wins this game by any means. They're field goal underdogs. It's not like they're 2-touchdown underdogs or anything. But here, as of Thursday morning, I'm leaning towards picking the Tide.
Yeah, well, fair enough. I mean, easy way to calm your emotions if you're not saying you are, but Tennessee fans, I bet a lot of them are saying, well, we might lose, so if they win, it's all good times. If they lose, it's expected. James Pierce, is he a dog? Is he a great player to watch?
Yeah, he is. And really, just watch Tennessee's whole defensive line. They're going to rotate 8 or 10 of those guys in. And a lot of really good players there. James Pierce, though, definitely the number one guy. He made probably the biggest play of the game last week when he stripped Graham Mertz at the 1-yard line and recovered the fumble in the first half that kept Tennessee just down 3 as their offense was really stagnant. So he kind of had a little bit of a quiet start to the season. Granted, I think he played all of combined like 20 snaps in the Chattanooga and Kent State games. But these last 2 weeks against Arkansas and Florida, he's played like the guy that was projected as a top 5 pick here in the offseason.
I was going to say, do you think he goes top 10?
Yeah, I still think so. I mean, I don't think it'll be top 5, but I'll guess still back half of the top 10, especially if he finishes out this year the way he's played the last 2 weeks.
Definitely. Well, I appreciate you joining us today, and thank you for the insight for Tennessee. And we'll find out what happens Saturday at 3:30. But again, this is Ryan Schumpert from Rocky Top Insider. Thank you, man.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Matson. You have a good one.
You too.